The climate crisis is also top of mind for many voters. The Mississippi River is at historic.
Mississippi River is drying up. Water levels in some areas near historic lows. It's already impacting supply chains and local tourism.
The Mississippi River, one of North America's most iconic and vital waterways, is undergoing a transformation that has stunned scientists and observers alike. The recent discovery that large sections of the river are drying up has sounded alarms across environmental, agricultural, and industrial sectors. A river once celebrated for its grandeur and sheer volume of water is now revealing bare banks, cracked sediment beds, and exposed relics that haven't seen daylight in decades. The phenomenon is no longer confined to speculation or distant possibility. It's unfolding in real time, with consequences that ripple through every facet of life connected to this vast aquatic artery. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. The Mississippi River stretches over 2,300 miles from its source in Minnesota to its mouth in the Gulf of Mexico, weaving through 10 states and supporting millions of lives and livelihoods. It has long been a lifeline for shipping, agriculture, wildlife, and cultural identity. Its waters fuel industries, irrigate crops, transport goods, and support complex ecosystems. The river is not only a geographical fixture, but a cornerstone of the American landscape, both economically and symbolically. Its drying, therefore, is not just a change in hydrology, it's a rupture in a system that has functioned reliably for centuries. In recent months, satellite images and ground reports have painted a disturbing picture. Water levels have dropped to historic lows, revealing sandbars where there once were channels, islands where only ripples once stirred, and wrecks of old boats and debris previously submerged in the deep. The visual change is dramatic enough, but the implications stretch far beyond the altered scenery. Barges, the unsung heroes of American freight, have been forced to reduce cargo loads or halt operations entirely. With the river becoming impassable in key sections, shipping lanes have fractured, causing delays and compounding existing supply chain stresses. The reasons behind the Mississippi River's unprecedented drying are multifaceted, driven largely by climatic shifts. Scientists point to prolonged droughts across the Midwest and parts of the South, which have drastically reduced rainfall and snowmelt, the primary sources of the river's flow. The upper Mississippi, which traditionally receives a significant influx from melting snow and seasonal rains, has experienced consecutive years of below-average precipitation. As a result, feeder streams and tributaries have dwindled or stopped flowing altogether, choking the river from its headwaters downward. This drought isn't merely a short dry spell, it is part of a larger, more troubling pattern of climatic instability. Record-breaking heat waves, shifting weather patterns, and reduced soil moisture have all contributed to the river's decline. The Mississippi Basin, which covers about 41% of the continental United States, is drying from the inside out. Groundwater levels have plummeted in tandem with surface water loss, exacerbating the crisis. As evaporation outpaces inflow, entire regions are watching their connection to the river wither away, quite literally, before their eyes. The agricultural implications are staggering. The Mississippi River is a critical artery for moving grain and other crops from America's heartland to global markets. With the river shallowing, barges can carry less weight, resulting in rising transportation costs and diminished export capacity. Farmers, already strained by volatile weather and fluctuating market prices, now face an additional burden, getting their crops to port. In a region where timing can mean the difference between profit and loss, the delays caused by low water levels can devastate entire harvests. Fertilizer shipments, inbound to inland farms, have also been disrupted, setting off a cascade of challenges for the coming planting seasons. Beyond economics, the environmental consequences are equally severe. Aquatic ecosystems that rely on consistent water levels are now under stress. Fish populations are struggling as habitats shrink and oxygen levels drop. Migratory birds that follow ancient flyways along the river's length are facing dwindling wetlands and feeding grounds. The delicate balance of the river's ecological community is unraveling, with each species' decline affecting countless others in a tightly interwoven web. Reduced water volume also concentrates pollutants, amplifying the impact of agricultural runoff, industrial waste, and sewage, which in turn harms aquatic life and threatens human health. Navigation hazards have multiplied as sandbars and submerged obstacles become new perils for boaters. In several places, the river has split into multiple shallow channels, confusing even seasoned navigators. Emergency dredging operations are underway, but the scale of intervention needed far exceeds current capacity. Efforts to keep the river navigable are turning into a race against time as each passing week sees further shrinkage. Ports that once bustled with daily barge traffic are now quiet, their loading docks stranded far from the retreating waterline. Communities that have lived in harmony with the river for generations are grappling with loss, not just of water but of identity. Towns built on river trade and tourism are watching their economies dry up alongside the riverbed. Cultural festivals, recreational events, and local traditions tied to the river are being canceled or scaled back. Residents describe a surreal sense of watching history change course, as the river that shaped their families and fortunes diminishes with each scorching day. Power generation is another sector feeling the strain. Many hydroelectric facilities and water-cooled power plants depend on the Mississippi's flow. As water levels drop, cooling capacity is reduced, leading to lower energy output and potential brownouts. In some areas, alternative water sources are being sought, but these too are under stress, and often cannot match the volume needed. The energy grid, particularly in river-adjacent states, faces mounting pressure to adapt or suffer reduced resilience during peak demand periods. Infrastructure along the Mississippi was built with the assumption of reliability. Levees, locks, dams, and ports engineered for known water levels and flow rates. With the river deviating so dramatically from historical norms, this infrastructure is being pushed to the brink. Foundations are weakening, sediment is shifting, and the risk of failure in key control systems is increasing. Civil engineers are now confronted with the monumental task of reassessing the long-term viability of thousands of miles of river-adjacent structures, many of which were not designed for such extreme variability. Industries that depend on the river for raw materials or cooling water are now re-evaluating their operations. Refineries, chemical plants, and manufacturing facilities are being forced to reduce output or invest in costly adaptations. Insurance companies are taking note as well, reassessing risk models and adjusting coverage plans. The economic ripple effects extend far beyond the river's banks, touching sectors from insurance to logistics to food processing. Tourism, too, has taken a hit. Riverboat cruises, once a romantic draw for travelers seeking a slice of Americana, are being canceled due to unsafe navigation conditions. Parks and recreational areas that relied on the river's allure are reporting plummeting visitor numbers. Guides, outfitters, and local businesses tied to the river's seasonal rhythms are suddenly without income, unsure of whether their livelihoods will return with the water. The Mississippi's historical role as a transportation corridor is at risk of being permanently diminished. Alternative routes, including rail and highway transport, are stepping in to fill the void. But these systems are already under stress from increased demand and aging infrastructure. What once could be moved efficiently and cheaply via barge now requires more fuel, more trucks, and more personnel, all of which contribute to increased emissions and costs. The cultural symbolism of the Mississippi cannot be understated. This is the river of Mark Twain, the river that split a nation during the Civil War, the river that served as a pathway for freedom and migration. Its drying is not just a physical event, it's a cultural rupture. Artists, historians, and writers are beginning to grapple with the implications of a diminished Mississippi, exploring what it means for national identity when a defining element of the landscape is vanishing. Even national defense considerations are quietly being reviewed. The river has long been considered a strategic asset for moving military equipment and supplies during emergencies. A less navigable river complicates these logistics, potentially hindering rapid response capabilities in times of national crisis. Federal agencies tasked with disaster preparedness and homeland security are now factoring in the shrinking river as a variable in their planning scenarios. Water rights disputes, once limited to the American West, may soon find fertile ground along the Mississippi. As water becomes scarcer, the prospect of interstate conflict over usage rights grows more likely. Legal frameworks that govern river access and diversion may come under strain, especially if states begin competing for limited resources to sustain agriculture, industry, and municipal needs. In places, the drying has exposed archaeological sites, long-buried Native American artifacts, and Civil War-era remnants, prompting interest from researchers and museums. However, these finds are bittersweet, unearthed not by careful excavation, but by ecological collapse. The juxtaposition of historical revelation with environmental distress adds another layer to the river's unraveling story. Urban centers that rely on the Mississippi for drinking water face a future of scarcity and uncertainty. Municipal water systems are now planning for deeper intake pipes, alternative sources, and more aggressive conservation measures for cities like St. Louis, Memphis, and New Orleans, which sit on the river's edge and depend on its constancy. The specter of long-term water stress looms ever closer. There is an underlying anxiety among scientists and policymakers that what is happening to the Mississippi is not an isolated incident but a harbinger of broader transformations. As global temperatures continue to rise and weather becomes more extreme, major rivers around the world may face similar fates. The Mississippi in drying becomes a case study in how climate change intersects with infrastructure, economy, culture, and ecology. It also serves as a warning. The systems built around assumptions of abundance may not survive the coming decades of scarcity. Public awareness of the river's plight is growing, but it is competing with a cacophony of other crises. Still, for those living in the basin, the message is clear. This is not a temporary inconvenience, but a profound shift in the region's reality. The river's retreat is prompting questions about the future of agriculture, of trade, of entire communities. It is not just water that is receding, but stability, predictability, and in many cases, hope. This transformation of the Mississippi River demands not only technical adaptation, but a fundamental reimagining of humanity's relationship with water. It challenges centuries-old assumptions about abundance, cycles, and control. As scientists continue to study the unfolding phenomenon, as communities scramble to adjust, and as ecosystems teeter on the brink, one thing is clear. The Mississippi story is no longer one of constancy and flow, but of change, vulnerability, and an urgent call to pay attention. While the Mississippi River's drying is already a dramatic event, what continues to unfold is an even more sobering picture of complex and unforeseen ripple effects, expanding far beyond immediate expectations. As each week passes, the phenomenon reveals new vulnerabilities across natural systems and human-made infrastructures, areas once assumed to be buffered against environmental variability. Scientists and field researchers are now uncovering layers of impact that stretch deep into hydrology, biodiversity, urban resilience, economics, and long-term planning. The river's retreat is not just shrinking its physical form, it is redrawing boundaries of risk and responsibility across the entire continent. One of the most striking developments is the profound transformation taking place in the Mississippi River Delta. This sprawling region at the southern terminus of the river has always relied on the consistent delivery of sediment and freshwater to counterbalance coastal erosion and saltwater intrusion. With reduced river flow, this vital process is faltering. The sediment that once replenished marshes, wetlands, and barrier islands is no longer reaching these critical zones in adequate quantities. Instead of nourishing the landscape, the diminished flow is accelerating the degradation of the delta. Land is disappearing at an alarming rate, exposing inland areas to the direct assault of rising seas and tropical storm surges. In coastal Louisiana, entire communities built on reclaimed wetlands are now facing existential threats. Without the protective buffer of marshlands, neighborhoods that were once considered safe are experiencing higher rates of flooding, even from routine high tides. Saltwater, once kept at bay by the powerful outflow of the Mississippi, is now pushing upstream, entering freshwater aquifers and contaminating municipal water supplies. Farmers along the lower stretches of the river have reported increasingly saline irrigation water, which poisons crops and reduces soil fertility over time. These problems are insidious, not always immediately visible, yet they steadily erode the foundation of life along the river. Meanwhile, ecosystems once dependent on the Mississippi's annual pulses of water are entering a state of biological shock. In floodplain forests, ancient cottonwoods and willows that depend on seasonal inundation are dying from dehydration. The complex food web that links aquatic invertebrates, amphibians, birds, and large mammals is unraveling as water availability becomes sporadic and unpredictable. Some species have begun migrating away from traditional breeding or feeding grounds, while others are vanishing entirely from certain sections of the river. Scientists studying biodiversity along the lower basin have noted a sharp decline in fish larvae, amphibian eggs, and aquatic insects, an ominous sign of collapsing ecological productivity. In northern sections, particularly near the headwaters in Minnesota and Wisconsin, indigenous communities are confronting a multi-layered crisis. For many Native American nations, the Mississippi River is not only a source of sustenance but a spiritual and cultural guide. Ceremonial sites, fishing grounds, and sacred landscapes are being affected by both physical changes and regulatory tensions. With water levels so low, tribal members are encountering increased restrictions on traditional fishing and gathering practices, prompting legal and cultural disputes over sovereignty and stewardship. These conflicts reflect deeper issues about who has the right to define the river's future and how traditional ecological knowledge is valued or dismissed in the management of natural resources. Infrastructure originally built to control the river's whims is now failing to cope with its extremes. Levees designed for flood containment are becoming irrelevant in dry conditions, yet they block natural tributary flows and prevent water from spreading to areas that desperately need it. Ironically, flood protection systems are now contributing to localized drought conditions by interfering with the river's capacity to hydrate surrounding ecosystems during the rare moments when water does become available. The enormous system of locks and dams built for navigation and hydroelectric power is also under strain. With less water to work with, these control points are frequently inoperable, causing navigation bottlenecks and reducing energy output. Engineers are now wrestling with the paradox of maintaining systems designed for abundance in a time of scarcity. Public health experts are beginning to explore how a drying Mississippi might introduce new risks to human populations. As river levels fall and water slows, standing pools are more likely to become breeding grounds for disease vectors like mosquitoes, which can spread West Nile virus and other illnesses. Concentrated pollutants in lower water volumes also increase the likelihood of harmful algal blooms and bacterial outbreaks, particularly in warmer stretches of the river. These threats are not limited to rural or remote areas. Major cities that draw drinking water from the Mississippi are facing heightened risks of contamination and must now invest heavily in treatment and monitoring systems to ensure public safety. The financial costs of this unfolding crisis are escalating in silent, accumulating ways. Insurance companies are reevaluating property risk assessments across the Mississippi Basin, especially in places where water-related hazards are increasing in frequency and severity. Previously, affordable premiums for flood or drought insurance are becoming prohibitively expensive, forcing families and small businesses to choose between maintaining coverage or taking the gamble of going without. Credit markets, too, are reacting. Financial institutions that back agricultural loans and commercial shipping are becoming more cautious, demanding stricter terms and higher interest rates. Economic stability in river-adjacent communities is fraying at the seams as uncertainty becomes the new norm. At the same time, energy systems tied to the Mississippi River are entering a precarious phase. While hydroelectric facilities face diminished output, thermal power plants that rely on river water for cooling are hitting regulatory limits on temperature discharge. With less water to absorb the heat generated during electricity production, many plants are being forced to curtail operations during the hottest parts of the day. This phenomenon is particularly dangerous during heat waves, when energy demand peaks and the grid is most vulnerable. Utility providers are scrambling to develop workarounds such as closed-loop cooling systems or sourcing water from elsewhere, but these measures are expensive and time-consuming to implement. The scientific community is mobilizing to understand the long-term hydrological shifts taking place across the basin. Dozens of field research initiatives have been launched to monitor groundwater recharge rates, evapotranspiration patterns, and sediment transport dynamics. New collaborations between universities, federal agencies, and international climate researchers are producing models that suggest the Mississippi may never fully return to its historical norms. These models are now being integrated into broader climate projections that affect not just water management, but agricultural planning, infrastructure investment, and emergency preparedness strategies. Educational institutions along the Mississippi corridor are also stepping into new roles. Schools and universities are increasingly incorporating river conditions into curricula, treating the event not only as a science lesson, but a living classroom for environmental justice, political decision-making, and interdisciplinary resilience. Field trips, citizen science projects, and student-led monitoring initiatives are transforming the river's decline into a generational teaching moment, one that could shape how future leaders think about sustainability and adaptation. Efforts to adapt are emerging, though unevenly and often on a local scale. Some municipalities are investing in water reuse systems and rainwater harvesting, attempting to close the loop on consumption. Agricultural innovators are experimenting with drought-resistant crops and regenerative soil practices to maintain yields with less irrigation. Ports are exploring intermodal upgrades to shift more freight to rail when barge traffic is compromised. However, these scattered adaptations lack the coordination and scale needed to fully address the depth of the crisis. A comprehensive, basin-wide strategy remains elusive, hampered by jurisdictional fragmentation and political hesitancy. If you liked this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on the Mississippi River drying up so quickly? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.